When I accepted the job as a product lifecycle analyst in Glimmervale County, I thought that I had hit the jackpot. I hadn't even heard of NARRATED before I saw the posting, but the deeper that I looked, the more that it felt like a gold mine. Paid relocation for my whole family, a remote job, with only 1 or 2 mandatory days in the office each month. Their headquarters sat right in the center of Glimmervale, the city the county was named after, and as long as I lived within a 35-minute commute, I was good. And NARRATED wasn't just some fly-by-night startup either. They were a government contractor, growing year after year, with one of the best employee retention rates in the industry. Everything about the offer screamed stability. The relocation stipend was generous too, generous enough that we could move into Gensen Township, a wealthy little enclave tucked into the northeast hills of the county. It was everything that the brochures promised, one of the best school systems in the state, pristine colonial-style homes, seasonal festivals, and a well-known annual celebration called the Harvest Festival, which happened every October at their community center. It was beautiful. Hallmark, really. The house that we found looked something out of a magazine spread. The entirety of the neighborhood seemed friendly, polite, and welcoming. Except for one, of course. Our neighbor. Something about him was wrong, if not wrong, unnatural. The first time that we encountered him was the night that we moved in. And by the time that we pulled on to Hopper Street, the kids had been out cold for hours. Julie and I sat there for a moment in the driveway, headlights washing over our new house. Our fresh start. No more city smog, no more sirens, and no more factories. Just the Appalachians, a sky full of stars, the moon casting its pale light over the neighborhood like a filter. The street didn't even have proper lamps, but the glow was enough. The outlines of the trees and hills were more beautiful than the colors themselves, like we'd stepped into a postcard. When we opened the car doors, it felt like entering another world. The night air hit first, cool, sharp, and clean in a way that burned the nose. Nature's version of the reset button. Crickets chirped in waves, small animals shuffled in the brush across the street, and for the first time in 13 hours of driving, I didn't feel suffocated. Julia shepherded the kids inside while I started hauling overnight bags in a cooler from the back. I must have only been outside 20 minutes, maybe less, when I heard it. The suction hiss of a door opening, followed by the creak of a screen door. And then everything stopped. Not just the rustling in the bushes, the crickets too. Gone. Silence hit me like a freight. You know how they say when everything's quiet, it means a predator's close. And that's exactly what it felt like. Not goosebumps yet, but that chill prickle under the skin that precedes them. The sixth sense that eyes are on you. And I froze in the driveway, cooler clutched to my chest, staring at a yard that I hadn't even noticed until now. No porch light, just a figure in the doorway, half hidden by the glare of my headlights. A faint flicker from inside, probably a TV, outlining him in a wavering glow. I managed, aiming for casual but landing somewhere between shaky and awkward. Hey. Good morning, what we're having. I'm your new neighbor, Clint. Nothing except what appeared to be the silhouette of his head turned to face me. I tried again. See that you're an early bird, too. What I got back wasn't words, just a grunt, then the heavy thud of a door closing, followed by the snap of the screen door smacking shut. And the second that it did, the crickets started up again, like nothing had happened. And I stood there for a beat, cooler in hand, feeling like I'd already failed some kind of test. Then I went back to unloading, killed the headlights, and locked up. Julie and I whispered about the week's plans, and before long, we were out cold, lulled to sleep by the steady drone of insects chirping through the cracked window. And still, as Julia drifted off, I couldn't shake the awkward thought. Our first impression hadn't gone so great. The morning came too early. Well, morning is generous. We pulled in at 2 a.m., but kids don't care about details. Jackson, who was 6 years old and powered entirely by chaos, launched himself into our bed at 7 a.m. sharp. Mom, Dad, come on. All our stuff's still in the car and I'm bored. I've been up forever. Come on. Gabby wandered in, rubbing her eyes. Jackson, I grabbed your DS last night. Before I could thank her, Jackson scrambled off the bed. My jaw clenched as his foot planted squarely in my crotch on his way out. Who needs caffeine when you've got kids, right? Julie and I went into full parental delegation mode. She'd started breakfast, I'd haul in the essential kitchen boxes, and then we'd work through the rest of the car. Which, honestly, was fine. It gave me my first look at Hopper Street in daylight. The neighborhood was even prettier in the sun. Gryliday Oval, they called it. Dunsen's big, family-friendly community. Tree-lined streets, houses tucked back just enough so that way you felt like you had privacy. Our place faced 3 wooded lots across the road, with more houses nestled deeper in the trees. To the left, another patch of woods, and to the right, the neighbor. The man from last night. His house didn't match the rest. Not in a broken down way exactly, just different. A short waist high picketed fence ringed the yard, paint chipping and flaking. Weedy wildflowers sprouted tall in patches where everyone else's lawns looked freshly groomed. A couple pieces of siding sagged loose on the front, but the porch itself was nearly arranged. 2 stout posts in the middle of the yard held pulley joints strung with nylon wire, and on the posts, lanterns dangled from metal hooks on one end of the wire. Bird feeders swayed lazily across the nylon travel to the porch where the cords were tied off to metal loops, which were attached to hooks drilled into the porch posts. If you ignored the rough edges, it was almost quaint, idyllic even. But it didn't belong here. Not on Hopper Street, not in Dunsen Township. It was outdated, looked like it clashed with HOA, and just fit more of a rural aesthetic. I told myself maybe that we just disturbed his peace last night. Maybe he wasn't a talk to the new guy at 2 a.m. type. And I was halfway convinced when I saw the curtain reel close in the corner of my view. He had been watching, and now he knew that I was watching back. Second impression. Nailed it. Most of the weekend blurred into unpacking boxes and trying to make the place feel like home. And by Sunday evening, though, we finally got a taste of the neighborhood. A group of couples stopped by with a gift basket and warm smiles. Cookies, wine, the usual welcome to the neighborhood stuff. Then there were a few handmade candles and some pre-made herb mixes. A crafty bunch. They hung around the porch, trading restaurant recommendations and small talk. It couldn't have been more than an hour, but it felt good to put names to faces. Donna and Gerald ducked out first, then Tracy and Dan, and Leah headed back to cook dinner for her kids, leaving her husband, Will, leaning on the railing with me. He sipped a beer, let a pause hang in the air, and then leaned in a little. So, he asked casually, "How's Curtis, man?" "Who?" "Curtis. Your neighbor?" "Oh, he's fine, I guess. Doesn't seem like he wants much to do with us, but then again, we haven't exactly been quiet while moving in." "That's not what I mean." And I frowned. "What do you mean?" Will gave me this look, part smirk, but part warning. "Curtis belongs in jail. They never proved anything, but his wife disappeared back when I was a kid. They ain't never found her. Whole town knows the story. Guy's a psycho. Doesn't talk to anyone. If I were you, I'd steer clear." I knew my face must have betrayed me because Will chuckled, and then he straightened up like he'd already decided the conversation was over. "Well, I'll see you later, man." "What the fuck? You gonna leave me with that?" And he turned back, almost like an afterthought, put a hand on my shoulder. "All right. I'm sorry. I'm sure that it's safe now. Lightning doesn't strike twice." And just like that, he was gone. I stood on the porch with the line rattling in my skull, not sure if it was supposed to be a joke or the worst kind of reassurance. Either way, my skin crawled. Because when the crowd left and the last car pulled away, and I realized something. The crickets were gone for the whole visit. Silence. Heavy and total. Just like the night that we arrived. And I couldn't shake the thought. Was he out there somewhere watching? I know how this must sound. Up until this point, nothing had really happened. Curtis scared the bugs off my property. Sure, I'd even wake up at night and hear crickets inside the house, like they'd been driven to the walls, but beyond that, nothing concrete. Life was good. Work was easy. Maybe 3 hours of real work a day. Jackson thrived at school, so popular that we had to cap sleepovers because half the neighborhood kids wanted to camp out in our basement. And Gabby had her own little circle, Sydney and Kayla, plus her first real crush on a boy named Dunen from a few streets down. She'd always asked to go walk his family's dog with him. Jules was already tight with the local moms, spending her days getting to know the town while I stayed buried in spreadsheets. And we were fitting in. Perfectly, I'd say, in a picture book-esque way. We knew everyone always likes the new people in town, but our assimilation seemed effortless. That's why what I learned at Gabby's parent-teacher conference had gutted me. Mr. Parks was her pre-algebra teacher, a wiry guy with a Hollywood picture smile. I expected him to walk us through test scores and homework. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and asked, "So you guys got that nice colonial on Hopper Street?" It was strange he knew exactly where we lived, but he explained it away quick. "Dunsen doesn't get too many homes for sale per year. Nobody likes to leave." I nodded casual. "Yeah, it's a nice place. Bigger than we expected." "Well," he said, "you must have gotten a pretty sweet deal on it, all things considered." Jules frowned. "What do you mean?" That's when he gave us the look. The one where you could tell that he knew something that we didn't. "Oh, you really don't know, do you?" My stomach dropped. "Don't know what?" He hesitated, but only for a second. "Family before you went missing." He paused almost theatrically. "Or maybe they left. Hard to say. They left all their stuff, though, so I assume the worst." My thoughts snapped back to our move-in ready house. The couches, the beds, all the pre-furnished perks. Mr. Parks didn't stop. "I guess they don't have to disclose that kind of thing, since technically no one died in it." That's when Jules broke. Tears welled and spilled, and she huffed before purposely striding from the room. And I glared at Parks, my face burning hot, but he only threw up his hands like it was some innocent slip. When I turned to follow Jules, I caught his reflection in a classroom door's window. Maybe it was just the glare, but for half a second, he looked like he was smiling. When I swung the door open, I gave one last glance back. His face was apologetic, his hands already working their way back up. And then I turned the corner and followed my wife to the car. The ride home was short, broken only by a stop at the hardware store. Julia was adamant about making sure that the house was safe, so we stocked up on a few new locks and deadbolts for every entrance. Even the shed at the back of the property got a new latch and a combination lock. I never told her about Curtis's wife. Didn't want to scare her. Sure, we had the relocation stipend, but not enough to just up and leave. We were locked in, financially, if not literally. And I kept telling myself, maybe Curtis was just a bitter old man. Better not to plant seeds of paranoia in her head. The seeds that gnawed at the back of my mind since we moved in. I had tried to speak to him prior, but I left the ball on his side of the court long ago. If he didn't want to talk to us, then let him want nothing from us. That evening, I was determined to have each new lock installed. At the time, I was grabbing the last one to take out back. The kids were leaving on a bike ride with Dunen. Curtis was out as well, tying something to his fence, when strolled by walking towards my shed. And he was older than I realized, maybe late 60s, scruffy gray beard and a scalp bare as bone. He didn't look at me once as I walked to the tree line, just kept working his knots. And as the evergreen swallowed him from view, the crickets swelled. Every step deeper into the yard, louder. Their endless drone had been gnawing at me for months now. At first, they'd been across the street, then around the house's perimeter. And by October, it felt like at least a few of them were peddling their chirps in my house every other night. And if I was upstairs, I'd hear them in the kitchen. If I was downstairs, I'd hear them in the basement or in the attic. Now, I had tried bug bombs, hired pest control. Nothing worked. I could hear them every night, but I'd never managed to rid myself of them. So by the time that I was kneeling on the shed ramp, fumbling screws in the half-dark, Sweat began to sheen and glisten on my forehead. I was at my limit. The drowning in my ears, the slick handle of the screwdriver, the sheer futility of it all. I fumbled with the buttons of my flannel and flung it over the brush with a growl of frustration. I could feel the heat of anger at the top of my skull. Myself failing to focus. And eventually, the October air cooled me as I finished the final screw on the latch. The shed door shut smooth, the new lock clicked into place. One small victory. I stepped off the ramp and went to retrieve my shirt. And that's when I saw it. A footpath into the woods. Grass pressed down, not from one trip, but from many. Squatted spots along the way, like someone had paused, crouched, and waited. So many spots. And 30 feet into the tree line, barely visible in the dusk, a trail camera. My stomach dropped. I'd fucking had it. None of my anger was about the fucking bugs. I'd been alive 38 years. I know what bugs sound like. This was different. And by then, I was certain that if Curtis wasn't a serial killer, he was a creepy asshole of a neighbor. Who sets a camera up in someone else's backyard? I grabbed the strap looped around the tree, hunting for the buckle, and my frustration turned into a blunt, stupid rhythm. Pull, cuss, yank. The strap slid, and I cursed louder. I slammed it back into the trunk, yanked it harder, and the nylon whined in my hands. Fuck you, you fucking stupid fucking camera! Don't fuck with me! And as the strap broke, I threw the damned thing into the brush. It landed with a crash, branches snapping and leaves protesting. And for a second, the crunch kept going, like an echo stretched out as if a squirrel got spooked and scattered away, maybe a few. And then, nothing. Dead quiet. My anger died the second that the silence hit. That uncanny stillness pressed in, heavier than the crickets ever were. I bent, picked up the busted trail cam, and stiffly scanned the trees before walking back towards the yard. Curtis was still outside. He wasn't trimming hedges anymore. He was on his back deck, filling a generator with gas. I stopped at the fence, holding up the camera up. My voice came out hard but shaky. "You lose something?" He glanced at me, and back at what he was doing. "Hey! Don't ignore me! This yours? Why the fuck is it pointing at my yard?" And this time he turned, walked up to the fence, reached out and took the camera from my hand. And for a second, his face shifted. A flash of concern, gone almost as soon as it appeared. He gave the faintest shake of his head and pressed the camera back into my palms. And then he turned away. Something in me snapped. "You know you can use English, right?" He didn't answer. I threw the trail cam at the edge of the garden bed. It clattered against the pavers, loud in the stillness. He glanced back once, not angry, not offended, just resigned. A face like someone bracing for something inevitable. Then he slid his glass door shut behind him and disappeared into the house. And I stood there, feeling like a kid who had just mouthed off at the wrong adult. But I wasn't about to try to undo it. I walked back to my house. Inside, the air smelled of one of those homemade candles from the neighborhood gift basket that first week that we were here. Jules greeted me with a smile, happy that I'd finished locking everything down. I could hear footsteps scurrying upstairs, and my mood washed slightly, happy I was with my family. I smiled back, but my hand still itched with the memory of the camera. And later that night, long after Julia and the kids had gone to bed, I caught him again. Just a silhouette in his yard, leaning on the fence line like he was standing watch. He didn't look at me, didn't wave, just faced my house and the street, still as a scarecrow, until I shut the curtains. The rest of that week, the week leading up to the Harvest Festival, passed in a blur. Despite being the first week of October, every house in town was already draped in Halloween decorations. Every house except Curtis's, of course. Gabby spent days agonizing over what she'd wear for her school's Halloween dance. And Jackson? He was Batman. Every single day. Julia and I barely had time for Halloween antics yet. The township committee had already roped us into volunteering for the Harvest Festival. Seemed harmless enough. get close with the neighbors, fit in. I signed up as an assistant games director for the kids, and Julia would help in the kitchen. The festival ran 3 nights, and honestly, it wasn't as big as I'd expected, considering how heavily the township advertised it. Hardly any food trucks, barely any rides, just a carousel, a miniature Ferris wheel, and a scattering of booths. The booths were stranger than I expected too. The pumpkin patch was just a few rows of carved guards already prepping to be thrown away, their inside showing a little rot, appearing slightly soft. And at the kids' craft table, I could swear that I heard them humming in unison a dry, rhythmic rasp that I wasn't familiar with, but it was unnerving. Whenever kids do anything and you pull it out of context, they just seem like little creeps, even my own sometimes. The first 2 days of the feast, I was swamped running games, and on the last day, they stuck me in the dunk tank, not with water either. The local winery had filled it with their signature red. Now, you would think that that would be fun, but it wasn't. The wine stained everything that it touched and left me sticky, and by the end of the day, my skin was dyed and my thighs were raw. Eventually, it all wrapped up with the harvest feast, a glorified Thanksgiving dinner under the massive rental tent. Rows of folding tables, buffet lines, the whole town crammed together with paper plates and forced smiles. And the food was edible, the turkey especially. Julia leaned over and whispered that it was seasoned the same way as those neighbor spice packets we'd been gifted when we first moved in, the ones we tried once and immediately tossed. I was picking at mine when Mr. Hunt, one of the older guys, always too loud, made an offhanded comment as I asked for a thigh. "Careful," he said, grinning. "Curtis loves dark meat, too." And the table laughed. And I didn't. For the first time, it really hit me. Maybe Curtis wasn't cold because he was a loner. Maybe he just didn't like me. Didn't like us. And the thought dug into my chest. Did my neighbor just hate me because I was black? The dinner broke up early when the power went out. Grid-wide outage. Most people left. Dugan and his parents gave the kids a ride home, and Julia and I stayed behind to help clean the tent for another 45 minutes, and then headed out as the sky went dusky. On the drive home, my head kept drifting back to Curtis. He ticked every box of suspicion in the quietest, most boring ways. I kept telling myself that I was paranoid, that I was the one letting other people's gossip shape my judgment. But Will's joke about his wife, Mr. Park's smug smirk, and the way that the town seemed to close ranks whenever Curtis was mentioned. Something felt wrong. When we pulled into the driveway, the mailbox flag was up. A single blank envelope, no return address. I shrugged it off. Probably an ad, I said, and I opened it out of habit. Yep, roofing company. Once inside, I set it on the island in the kitchen. Jules and I got washed up, and we watched Scream 1996 on our iPad while lounging on the living room couch. I'd shown it to her back when we started dating, and it soon became her favorite movie. The first scene was so iconic to us. It was ironic too, considering that we just changed the locks during the prior week. And eventually the movie wrapped up with the iconic twist as darkness showed from all of our windows. And the power was still out, candles glowed in dim clusters, and we called it an early night. But I couldn't let it be. I kept replaying the way people talked about Curtis. I kept seeing the camera in my hand. I told Julia that I'd walk the perimeter and lock up. Instead, I found myself opening the envelope again, staring at the message inside until the ink blurred. I don't know why I told my wife that it was a roofing ad. Maybe I wanted it to be. But when I unfolded the paper again, there weren't any coupons. Just one line scrawled in ink so heavy that it bled through the page. I made my way to the front door and then I stepped outside. My motion sensor porch light staggered to life as I crossed the driveway and across the yard towards the fence. Curtis's lantern swung and threw lazy bands of light over the tall weeds in his yard. His screen door was hooked open, and I called softly a couple of times. "Curtis!" And I heard nothing but the brittle echo of my voice. I tossed a stone at his porch steps, and it bounced. Nothing more. And I turned to head back and froze. A sound crawled out of the dark, familiar and wrong. Stridulation. The dry rasps of crickets. but slower, deliberate, like someone trying to mimic their cadence. A soft croak rolled through the yard. In the half-light, a silhouette moved along the side of my garage, shoulders brushed briefly by the glow of Curtis's yard lanterns. "Dugan?" I said, squinting. The kid moved like a puppet, along the wall, making that awful cricket call without speaking. It was enough to push me back. "Dugan, cut it out. This isn't funny. Go home, or I'll..." His imitation stopped the moment my motion lamp snapped on. For a second, the only sound was the hum of the bulb, and then the chorus of insect noises swelling all around us. And then I saw them. Dozens of little white lights across the street, blinking in pairs, each attached to the shadowy silhouette in the ditch and under the trees. Rilladay Oval, our perfect neighborhood. The chirping went deafening as the motion light dimmed to conserve power. Junk, I thought. I heard the sound of an engine start up, then my neighbor's house lit up from the inside. His generator. Dugan lunged from the corner of my eye. He came at me with wet, ragged breaths, half cry and half growl, trying to bite, his teeth clacking against each other with each empty bite of his maw. I shoved him out of the grapple and my boot connected with his chest. At that instant, there was a sharp metallic click, the sound of a gun being racked, and then a single, thunderous boom. And warm wetness splattered across my face and neck. I looked up and I saw it. Dugan, or what used to be Dugan, his shoulder and half his neck blown away, flesh twitching and writhing where bone should have been. And Curtis fired again. The shot tore through his hip, spinning him down and onto the grass. And then it split. The Dugan thing's back opened like a zipper, straight from the scalp down past his collar. A membrane bulged, wet and glistening, sliding out from the bottom of his skull, pushing out through the muscles and tendons of his neck. 6 noodle-thin tentacles unfurled from his spine. The thing inside slithered free, using its appendages to fling through the grass towards the back of the house before leaping into the bushes, leaving behind what was once my daughter's crush. And gunfire roared. I snapped my head up, trying to find a bearing on what was going on. Curtis was on his porch, shotgun booming in a steady rhythm, cutting down silhouettes charging from across the street. The air was filled with a symphony of insect noise, shrill and deafening. And then Curtis flipped on his porch light. Not yellow, not white. A violet glow sweeping across his yard like a comb. Under it, the things froze, their forms jerking in confusion. Curtis reached to his porch posts, unhooked the hoops that held the lanterns. The nylon lines snapped free and the lanterns dropped, shattering against the stone pavers. The many explosions lit the yard like flashbangs. Fire bloomed in the thigh-high weeds, and 5 of our neighbors ignited at once, shrieking and flailing. And I wanted to cheer. And for one insane moment, I thought that he might actually win. Just an old man, alone on his porch, holding off the entire neighborhood with fire and a shotgun. It was suicidal. It was impossible. And yet, for a heartbeat, I believed. But it didn't last. The gunfire, the insect drones, the flames. It all cut out at once, and his porch light died, and the generator sputtered into silence. In the red glow of burning weeds, I saw them swarm, shapes skittering through my yard, shadows pouring up from Curtis's backyard where the generator had been. Mr. Rain, the man who had always bragged about his lawn, rushed Curtis. A shot cracked and Rain's chest blew open. His ribs exploded out of his back. Curtis reloaded with inhuman speed, a shell clamped between his fingers until something snagged him. A pale arm hooked his left shoulder and yanked. His arm tore out of the socket with a wet pop, twisting grotesquely behind him. Curtis didn't falter. Down to one knee, he slammed the butt of the shotgun into his thigh, racked it with one hand, and jammed his thumb against the trigger. The last shot went off the same second Will lunged from the other side. The buckshot turned Will's head into a spray of cartilage and brain. But Will's momentum carried through. His open hand smacked Curtis across the face, and when Curtis hit the ground, his head was rotated nearly 2/3 the wrong way. And just like that, the good neighbor was gone. Only moments passed before I realized every remaining pair of eyes were laser focused on me. Some were in their street, some in yards, all of them frozen. And I took a step back towards the porch, and they stepped. And I sped up, and they matched my pace. I turned and bolted, and the raspy, insectile chorus was joined by the thunder of feet stomping on pavement, boots tearing through grass. I slammed the door, and I latched it, and for a second there was nothing. And then the first heavy body hit wood with a gut-punching thud. I had to get to Jules and the kids. I had to save them. But as I passed the island, I stopped. The envelope sat where I'd left it. This time the words landed. Suffer not the parasite to breed. Burn its harvest. I understood. I understood it too late. I flipped on every gas burner in the kitchen onto high, all 10, and then pivoted. A dark crimson glow carried itself down the stairs, painting the house like an omen. Each entrance shuddered under the pounding hands, but not a peep from my family. I hit the stairs. The slams from down the steps became a constant metallic drum. I burst into Jackson's room. Empty. Gabby's room next. Empty. The master. I threw the door wide and froze. Julia was not herself, held down by a raspy, humming Gabby and Jackson. Her body was folded like paper in ways a human frame should not permit. Legs curled up and over her shoulders, feet planted at the sides of her head, arms splayed and twitching, a mouth gaping. Her eyes had rolled back. The sounds coming from her throat were wet, croaking. Not the scream that I expected, but something that sank into my teeth. For a terrible moment, I watched the top of her skull seam and pull. The scalp puckered as the backside just finished cinching back up. Her eyes rolled forward and met mine. A wet, gurgling hiss escaped her lips. Bone cracking and the sick sounds of joints popping filled the room as her back uncurled, creaking like a broken hinge slowly swinging. I reached for the knob and I slammed the door shut. Something inside slammed back too, bracing with my back against the door and my hand still on the knob. My heartbeat pitched upwards, a sharp anxiety filling my chest. Under the circumstances, it was absurd that I could control my breathing, but with the realization that my family had been ripped open and infected with those things, my motor functions began to fail me. Another slam against the door, the sound of wood splintering. I let go of the handle and I broke for the steps. Before I could get to the end of the hallway, Jackson burst through the door, crashing into the wall and correcting himself against the opposite one on the bounce back, shambling like a marionette towards me. Gabby followed, vibrations cooing from her throat, clutching at the warped wrist of her mother. And for a moment, it was a collective, slow shuffle, but as soon as I took the final staggering shuffle to the stairs, the flip switched. Under the smell of gas, I bolted down the stairs, Jackson and Gabby pinballing off the walls behind me, their little feet drumming the hall. The back sliding door shattered as I rounded the corner railing, entering the kitchen. 10 bodies poured through the breach, sliding and lunging across broken glass, colliding with my family as they rounded the stairwell railing after me. I collided with the corner wall that conjuncted our living room and the kitchen, rolling off of it with the slightest glance over to my pursuers as they tumbled back towards our sofa in the dark. The bay windows of the living room and dining rooms exploded inward. Light and silhouettes spilled through, pouring onto the floor. I scrambled on all fours towards the basement door. Out of the corner of my eye, a glow rose in the foyer. One of the neighbors was on fire, staggering across the porch, trailing flames like a torch. Another, its upper body already burning, leapt through the dining room window, the carpet blackening under its feet. Curtis's fire had been taking its time. Milliseconds later, I was yanking the basement door shut behind me, latching it and pressing my back to it, lungs burning like I'd been sprinting across the country. I braced for the impact on the other side that would send me tumbling down the stairs. Buzzing. Darkness. Panic. And then I realized they weren't following as hard as I thought. The ones at the front were more distraction than danger. The cellar door was solid oak, sturdy but not unbreakable. A body slammed against it. At the same time, something upstairs ignited. The roar of a flash fire rolled through the house. Screeching followed, feral and high-pitched, animals flailing in flames, sizzling, popping, and then the screams. Human screams. Heat pressed against the door. The thing outside stopped shoving. Its last push ended in a wet, sliding sound of meat cooking against the wood, slumping down the other side. I wasn't safe. The door was already glowing at the edges. I didn't know how many were still outside, but I had to get out fast before the fire spread downstairs, before the air turned to nothing. I fumbled with the handrail and pushed into the dark basement, heart jackhammering through my pec. One of the small rectangular windows under the back deck was my only shot. I clawed at the latch, ripped at the cheap hinges. Screams upstairs bled into monstrous roars, and finally the hinges gave out. Getting through was another nightmare. I dragged a foldable table beneath the window, climbed onto it, and shoved my left arm out first, head pressed to my left shoulder, right arm twisting behind me across my back, fingers wrapping my left hip, trying to narrow myself enough to fit. I jumped, toes shoved off the wobbling table. It clattered out from under me as the deck above caught fire. Heat pressed down on my neck, giving the feeling that it was splitting. And then a patch of darkness that I can't remember. No more than 5 seconds, as if I blacked out. And when I opened my eyes, I clawed forward with one hand, legs splayed against the wall, whimpering as I thrashed. My fingers found a deck post and I pulled. My right shoulder popped with a sickening crackle of styrofoam tearing. Pain slowed me, but I persisted until my right shoulder crammed through. Once my upper body crested through the frame, I flung my injured right arm ahead of me and grabbed the post with both hands, dragging the rest of me out. Flames hissed overhead. Shapes stumbled onto the deck, their silhouettes warped by firelight. I crawled to the edge of the deck, keeping my head as low as possible beneath the inferno. Pushing through the shrubbery and into the cold night air, every instinct screamed for me to go back into the burning house just for cover. But instead, I hugged to the tree line, shambling to the shed. Moonlight turned everything silver, and I stayed in the shadows as scorched bodies wandered aimlessly around the house before succumbing to their damage. And I crouched, spun the combination lock, and slid inside. The shed smelled like oil and old grass clippings. I latched the flimsy pin locks, knowing that they'd stop nothing. Still, I pulled a tarp over myself and I slung behind the lawnmower. And that's where I've been. For 9 hours. Writing this. From time to time, I peeked through the tiny window. No fire trucks ever came. Curtis's house and mine are gone, collapsed into blackened ash. But the bodies are all gone too. Not on their own. At 5 a.m., the neighbors who didn't burn came out from their hypnosis and walked home without saying a thing. Some without shoes, some without their spouses or children. And shortly after, 2 unmarked trucks pulled up. Men in coveralls packed the corpses, loaded them into the back of the box trucks, and drove away. And by 6, dumpsters arrived. The cleanup crew was still out there, scooping the scraps of our homes into steel bins. But then 10 minutes ago, my phone buzzed. The job position you recently applied for has opened up again. Would you like to reapply? Product Lifecycle Analyst, NARRATED.